There is a specific kind of alone that nobody talks about. Not the alone of an empty apartment. Not the alone of a Friday night with nowhere to go. Those are real, but they are surface level. They have names. People understand them when you describe them. The alone I am talking about is the one that exists inside a crowded room. The one where you are standing at a party, surrounded by voices and laughter and the clinking of glasses, and something inside you is completely, perfectly, devastatingly quiet. You are nodding at the right moments. You are laughing when the joke lands. You are doing every single thing a person who belongs here is supposed to do. And somewhere behind all of it, in a place nobody at that party can see, you are more alone than you have ever been in your life. That is the alone this video is about. And if you have ever felt it, if you have ever performed belonging while privately drowning in the distance between who you actually are and what the room needed you to be, then I need you to stay with me. Because what I am about to tell you across the next several minutes has the ability to change the specific weight you have been carrying. Not fix it, not erase it, change it. Which is more useful than either of those things. Marcus Aurelius spent 12 years leading an empire while writing privately about loneliness. Epictetus was a slave who had nothing, owned nothing, controlled nothing about his external circumstances, and still arrived at a philosophy of such precise inner freedom that people have been studying it for 2,000 years. Seneca wrote letters about isolation to a friend he rarely saw. Letters so honest about the human experience of feeling unseen that they read less like ancient philosophy and more like something a very wise person wrote specifically for you, specifically for this moment, specifically because they somehow knew you would need it. They were not strangers to this feeling. Neither are you a stranger to it. You are just in it right now, and being in it makes it feel permanent. That is the first thing we need to address. Stoic truth number 1. Feeling alone and being abandoned are two entirely different things, and your mind has been treating them as the same. There is something your nervous system does when the loneliness gets heavy enough. It takes the feeling, which is real and valid and worth acknowledging, and it quietly converts it into a conclusion. The feeling says, I feel completely alone right now. The conclusion says, I am completely alone. I have always been alone. I will always be alone. Nobody has ever truly seen me, and nobody ever will. The feeling is honest. The conclusion is a story. And the difference between those two things is everything. The feeling deserves your attention. It is telling you something true about your current experience, about the gap between the connection you need and the connection you currently have access to. That gap is real. Ignoring it does not close it. The feeling is the messenger, and the messenger is doing its job correctly. The conclusion is what happens when the feeling has been sitting too long without being examined. When it has been allowed to move from the guest room into the master bedroom and slowly redecorate. When it stops being a report about the present moment and starts being a verdict about the permanent nature of your life. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, not for publication, not for praise, but for himself alone. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He was not writing about strength in the muscular sense. He was writing about the specific strength required to look at what the mind is doing with a feeling and decide whether to let it build a permanent residence or move it back to where it belongs, which is the present moment, where it is a feeling, not a fact. Here is what actually happens when the loneliness conclusion takes hold. You begin to act from it. You interpret neutral interactions as confirmation. The friend who took 3 days to reply was not busy. They are pulling away. The colleague who did not include you in a casual lunch was not being thoughtless. They do not value you. The family member who seemed distracted on the phone was not tired. They are done investing. Every ambiguous signal gets processed through the filter of the conclusion, and the conclusion gets to decide what everything means. And because the conclusion is a story about abandonment, everything starts to look like abandonment. The story feeds itself. It gets heavier. It starts to feel less like a story and more like evidence. This is what Stoics called the corruption of judgment. Not stupidity, not weakness. A very understandable, very human, and very correctable pattern in which the mind takes a feeling and promotes it to the status of universal truth without sufficient cause. The correction is not to stop feeling lonely. The correction is to stop letting the feeling write conclusions about the nature of reality. Feel it, name it, place it accurately in the present moment, then refuse to let it travel backward into your permanent identity or forward into your unwritten future. You are not abandoned. You are in a difficult season. Those are not the same thing. And the season, unlike the conclusion your mind wants to draw from it, will change. There is something nobody tells you about the people who seem the most connected. The ones with the full group chats. The ones whose weekends are always accounted for. The ones who seem to move through social rooms with a kind of effortless gravity, drawing people in without appearing to try. You have watched them. Maybe you have quietly envied them. Maybe you have used them as evidence in the case you were building against yourself. Evidence that connection comes naturally to some people and that you are simply not one of those people. Here is what you were not seeing. Most of them go home to the same quiet. Most of them have a version of the crowded room feeling that would surprise you completely if they ever said it out loud. Most of them have a person, or a mirror, or a ceiling they stare at in the dark, where the performance of belonging finally stops, and the actual interior experience of their life resumes. And that interior experience, for more people than you would ever guess from the outside, contains a loneliness that the packed social calendar has never once touched. Because surface connection and actual connection are two different things. And a life full of the first one, without the second, produces a specific exhaustion that is almost worse than straightforward isolation. At least isolation is honest about what it is. Stoic truth number 2. You have not been failing at connection. You have been attempting the wrong kind, in the wrong direction, for the wrong reasons. Epictetus drew a line that most people never draw. He separated the things that are within our control from the things that are not. And almost everything that lives in the social world, how people respond to you, whether they choose to invest, whether they see what you are actually offering, whether they have the capacity in their current lives to meet you where you are. Almost all of it lives outside that line, on the far side, in the territory that Epictetus spent his entire philosophy teaching people to stop pouring themselves into. You have been standing at the border of that territory pouring, the energy spent managing how you come across, the careful editing of what you share and what you hold back, calibrated to what you think the other person can handle, or what will make them like you more, or what will reduce the risk of the specific rejection that your particular history has made you most afraid of. The monitoring of their reactions during the conversation and the replay of the conversation afterward, scanning for signals, reading temperature, trying to determine whether the investment is being received or whether you are once again putting more in than is coming back. That entire process is exhausting. It is supposed to be exhausting. It is the exhaustion of someone trying to control something that was never in their jurisdiction. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Withdraw into yourself as much as you can. Associate with people who are likely to improve you." 2 instructions, both of them pointing in the same direction. Inward first, then outward, but selectively. Not broadcast connection aimed at everyone in the room. Concentrated connection aimed at the specific rare people who have the capacity to meet it. The withdrawal Seneca describes is not isolation dressed up in philosophical language. It is not permission to disappear. It is the recognition that the self you bring to connection needs to be known to you before it can be known by anyone else. That you cannot offer someone genuine access to a person you have never fully sat with yourself. Most people are lonely not because they lack the ability to connect, but because they have never been fully introduced to themselves. They know their resume, they know their social presentation, they know the version that performs well in group settings, and the version that comes out when something requires them to be impressive. But the interior person, the one with the specific fears and the particular way of seeing things, and the exact combination of wounds and strengths that makes them irreducibly themselves, that person has been waiting in a room that nobody visits, including the person themselves. And you cannot be truly known by another human being if you are a stranger to yourself. It is not possible. What gets known is the presentation. And the presentation, however polished, however likable, produces a specific kind of loneliness all its own. The loneliness of being liked for something that is not quite you, of receiving warmth that does not reach the part of you that actually needed warming. This is where the Stoic practice begins to matter in a way that is not abstract. Not as philosophy for its own sake, but as a direct, practical tool for the specific problem you are inside right now. Sit with yourself long enough to know what you actually think, about things that matter, about the direction of your life, about what you value when nobody is deciding what you should value, about what genuinely interests you beneath the interests you adopted because they were socially acceptable or relationally convenient, or just easier than admitting what you actually cared about. That person, the one who emerges from that honest sitting, is the one worth introducing to the world. Not the edited version, not the version calibrated for reception, the actual one. Because here is what is true and what the loneliness has been obscuring. Somewhere out there is a person who is waiting for exactly the frequency you broadcast when you are fully, unguardedly yourself. They are not waiting for your performance. They cannot even find you through your performance because the performance sounds like everyone else. They are waiting for the specific signal that only you produce when you stop managing the signal. You will not find them by expanding the broadcast. You will find them by making it more honest. Go inward first. Know yourself with the same seriousness you have been applying to trying to be known by others. Then come back out. Not to everyone, to the ones who recognize what you bring. The connection you have been exhausting yourself trying to manufacture is not something you build through effort. It is something you allow through honesty. And honesty starts in the room nobody else is in yet, the one inside you, the one that has been waiting this whole time. There is a moment that happens somewhere in the middle of a long season of loneliness that nobody warns you about. It is not the lowest point. The lowest point is dramatic enough to be recognizable. This moment is quieter and in many ways more dangerous. It is the moment when you stop expecting things to change, when the loneliness graduates from being something you are experiencing into something you have accepted as a permanent feature of your architecture, when you stop calling it a season and start calling it a personality trait, when you tell yourself, not loudly, not all at once, but in the slow, accumulated language of someone who has stopped fighting, that this is simply who you are. Someone who does not quite connect. Someone who exists at a slight angle to the rest of the world. Someone for whom the ordinary warmth of genuine human closeness is, for reasons you cannot fully name, perpetually just out of reach. That moment is not a revelation. It is a surrender dressed as self-awareness. And it is the most important moment to catch. Because once you accept the story, you begin to live inside it. And once you are living inside it, every piece of evidence the world offers gets sorted accordingly. The confirmations get kept. The contradictions get discarded. The story protects itself. It becomes invisible because it is no longer experienced as a story. It is experienced as reality. Stoic truth number 3. The identity you have built around your loneliness is not a discovery about who you are. It is a decision, and decisions can be reversed. Marcus Aurelius returned to a single theme more than almost any other across the 12 books of his private journals. He returned to it because he needed to. Because even an emperor, perhaps especially an emperor, required constant reminding of something the mind consistently resists accepting. The theme was this: you are not your circumstances. You are your response to them. Not in the motivational poster sense, not in the sense of toxic positivity that tells you to simply choose happiness and watch the loneliness dissolve. In the precise, demanding, philosophically rigorous sense of a man who understood that the one jurisdiction you have in this life, the only territory that is genuinely, permanently, unconditionally yours, is the interior one. The way you interpret what happens to you, the meaning you assign to it, the identity you construct from it or refuse to construct from it. You were lonely. That happened. It was real. It affected you in ways that are still visible in how you move through the world, how quickly you expect rejection, how carefully you guard the parts of yourself that have been met with indifference before. Those effects are real, and they deserve acknowledgement. This is not about pretending the history did not happen, but somewhere between the thing that happened and the person you are today, a translation occurred. The experience of loneliness became the identity of someone who is fundamentally alone. The wound became the definition, and the definition is now making decisions on your behalf that the original wound never had the authority to make. It is deciding who is safe to approach and who is not. It is deciding how much of yourself to offer and to whom. It is deciding in advance whether a connection is worth attempting based on a risk assessment built entirely from old data. Data from relationships that ended, from rooms where you were not seen, from people who did not have the capacity to receive what you were offering. Old data, from closed chapters, being used to write the open one. Epictetus said something that sounds simple until you actually sit inside it. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The reaction he was describing is not the immediate emotional one. Feel the emotion. That is not what he was asking you to suppress. He was describing the secondary reaction, the one that comes after the feeling, the one where the mind takes the feeling and decides what it means about you, about people, about the future, about whether connection is something that will ever genuinely be available to you. That secondary reaction is where the identity gets built or dismantled. And that reaction is within your control in a way that the original circumstance never was. Here is what dismantling it actually looks like. Not the theory, the practice. It looks like catching the moment when you walk into a room and the old story activates. The moment when the familiar voice starts its familiar commentary. Nobody here is going to be interested. You are going to stand at the edge of this again. You already know how this ends. Catching that moment, naming it, not as truth, as habit, as a very old recording, playing in a very new room. It looks like noticing the specific way your body prepares for rejection before rejection has even been offered. The slight withdrawal, the preemptive armor, the decision to give less than you have because giving everything and having it not be enough is a specific pain you have decided you are not willing to experience again. Noticing that the armor, which was built for protection, is now functioning as a wall, and walls keep out the cold, but they also keep out the warmth. It looks like making a different decision. Not a permanent one, not a declaration, just a different decision in this specific room, on this specific day, with this specific person who has not yet done anything to earn the suspicion you arrived with. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The anticipated rejection, the pre-experienced loneliness of a connection you have not yet attempted, the certain knowledge that it will not work, assembled from the evidence of times it did not work, applied universally to all future attempts, as though the past were a perfect predictor, rather than simply a record of specific moments that have already ended. You have been suffering the loneliness of connections you never attempted. Adding that imagined suffering to the real suffering of the ones that did not work out, carrying both, presenting the combined weight as evidence that the story is true. The story is not true. It is constructed. You built it from real materials, which is why it feels so solid. But constructed things can be taken apart by the same hands that built them. You are not someone who cannot connect. You are someone who was hurt enough times in the attempt that the mind, trying to protect you, built a story that discouraged future attempts. The mind was doing its job. It was trying to keep you safe from a specific pain it had learned to recognize. Thank it for the protection. Then tell it the protection is no longer required in the form it has been offering, because safety purchased at the cost of all connection is not actually safety. It is a different kind of alone, the voluntary kind, the kind you chose in order to avoid the involuntary kind. And chosen or not, it feels the same at midnight. Dismantle the story. Not all at once, one room at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of offering slightly more than the armor wanted you to offer to one person who has not yet been given a reason to be disqualified. The identity built around loneliness is not your permanent address. It is where you have been staying while the real one gets built. Start building. At some point, the silence stops being empty. You notice it first in small moments. The morning before the noise of the day begins. The specific quality of stillness in a room that is yours alone. The way your own thoughts, when you stop running from them, turn out to be more interesting company than you expected. There is a version of solitude that is simply loneliness with the panic removed. And that version, once you find it, changes the entire relationship you have with being alone. But we are not there yet. Right now, most of you watching this are still in the version that has the panic in it. The version where the silence feels accusatory, where the empty Saturday afternoon is not a gift but a verdict, where being alone feels less like a chosen state and more like evidence that something about you has been quietly, consistently, invisibly failing to clear the bar that everyone else seems to clear without visible effort. I want to talk about that bar, because that bar is one of the most destructive invisible structures operating in your life right now, and almost nobody names it directly. It sits just above wherever you currently are. It moves every time you approach it. It was built from other people's lives as they appear from the outside, which is to say, it was built from fiction. And you have been measuring your interior reality against a fictional external standard and finding yourself consistently, exhaustingly short. Stoic truth number 4. Solitude is not the punishment you have been treating it as. It is the training ground. And the people who learn what it is actually for become unreachable by the loneliness that currently has its hands around your life. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire and retreated into himself daily. Not occasionally, not when the circumstances allowed, daily. With the same discipline he applied to governance, to military strategy, to every external demand, the most powerful position in the known world placed on him. He understood something that the noise of modern life has made almost impossible to understand. That the interior world requires cultivation with the same seriousness as the exterior one. That a person who has not learned to inhabit their own solitude with any degree of comfort is a person who is permanently dependent on external circumstances to feel okay. And external circumstances, as anyone who has been paying attention already knows, are spectacularly unreliable providers of okay. The dependence is the vulnerability, not the solitude itself. When your sense of being all right requires the presence of other people, the noise of other lives, the constant confirmation that you are wanted and included and thought of, when the quiet triggers panic rather than rest, you have handed the controls of your interior state to something that exists entirely outside your control. You have made your stability contingent on other people's availability. And other people, through no fault of their own, will sometimes be unavailable, will sometimes be absorbed in their own lives, will sometimes simply not show up in the way you needed them to show up. And every single time that happens, the floor drops out. Epictetus lost everything a person can lose in the external sense. his freedom, his physical safety, his ability to determine the basic conditions of his daily existence. And from inside that complete external deprivation, he developed the most precise, most demanding, most genuinely liberating philosophy of inner life that the ancient world produced, because he had no choice but to go inward. The outside had been taken, only the inside remained. You still have the outside, which is precisely why you keep trying to solve an inside problem with outside solutions. More plans, more invitations extended, more hours spent in the managed performance of social presence, hoping that this time the quantity of contact will somehow produce the quality of connection that all the previous contact failed to produce. More scrolling through other people's presented lives, looking for evidence that your own is comparably full, comparably valid, comparably worth something. None of it touches the actual problem, because the actual problem is not the quantity of people in your life. It is the quality of the relationship you have with yourself when none of them are present. Seneca wrote, "Never be less idle than when you are idle, nor less alone than when you are alone." Read that again slowly. Never less idle than when idle, never less alone than when alone. The person who knows how to inhabit solitude productively is never wasting their quiet time and never truly isolated inside it. They are in conversation with themselves, with the ideas that only surface when the noise stops, with the parts of their character that only become visible when there is no audience to perform for. That conversation is where you actually find out who you are, not in the social rooms, not in the group chats, not in the performance of being someone that other people find acceptable and warm and easy to be around. In the quiet, in the room with just you in it, where the constructed self gets to rest and the actual self gets to breathe, and sometimes, if you stay long enough, gets to say something worth hearing. Here is what that practice looks like when it is working. You stop filling every quiet moment as though silence were a problem requiring immediate solution. You let the uncomfortable stillness be uncomfortable without immediately reaching for the phone, the television, the noise of any available distraction. You stay in the discomfort long enough to discover that it has a bottom, that it does not go down forever, that underneath the initial panic of unoccupied solitude, there is something that is not panic at all, something quieter, something that has been waiting with considerable patience for you to stop running long enough to notice it. That thing is you, the version of you that exists independently of every role you play and every relationship you maintain and every social context that requires you to be a particular thing for a particular set of people. The version that was present before all of those structures were built, and that will be present when any individual one of them changes or ends. That version is stable in a way that nothing external can be. Not because it is perfect, not because it is always comfortable company, but because it is constant. It does not leave. It does not become unavailable. It does not need you to perform for it, or earn its continued presence, or manage its impression of you. It is simply there, in the silence, waiting for you to stop treating the silence like an enemy and start treating it like the only place where the most important conversation you will ever have is actually available. The loneliness that brought you to this video is real. I am not dismissing it, but somewhere inside it, beneath the panic and the story and the accumulated weight of seasons that felt too long, there is a quiet that is not lonely at all. You have just never stayed long enough to find it. Stay. Everything we have covered until now has been building toward this, not as a conclusion, as an arrival, because there is a difference between ending something and arriving somewhere. Endings are passive. They simply stop. Arrivals require you to have actually traveled, to have covered real ground, to be standing somewhere genuinely different from where you started. And if you have stayed with this from the beginning, if you have sat inside these truths without flinching away from the ones that landed closest, then you are standing somewhere different right now. Maybe only slightly, maybe in ways you cannot fully articulate yet, but different. And different is where everything begins. There is one final thing the loneliness has been lying to you about. One last piece of the story that needs to be examined in honest light before you can walk forward with the full weight of what you now understand. It is perhaps the most persistent lie of all, the one that survives every rational argument you make against it, the one that returns at midnight regardless of how clearly you saw through it in the daylight. The lie is this: that your particular aloneness is unique, that what you carry is somehow more permanent, more structural, more written into the nature of things than what other people carry, that everyone else is navigating toward connection while you alone are navigating away from it, that the distance between you and genuine human warmth is not a season or a circumstance or a correctable pattern, but something closer to a sentence, something handed down, something you did not choose and cannot appeal. That lie is the last wall, and it is time to take it down. Stoic truth number 5. You were never as alone as the loneliness told you. And the proof has been present the entire time. You simply were not in a position to receive it. Think about why you are here, not in the abstract existential sense, in the specific literal sense of this moment. You found this video, or this video found you, because something in the title spoke to something in you that recognized itself. 9 Stoic truths for people who feel completely alone. You clicked because the words described your experience accurately enough to be worth your time. Now consider what that means. The words described your experience, which means someone wrote them from experience, which means the person who wrote them has been where you are, which means the feeling you have been carrying as proof of your unique isolation is in fact one of the most widely shared human experiences on the planet. Which means, at this precise moment, while you are watching this, there are people in apartments and houses and cars and offices across this country and across this world who are inside the same feeling, who would recognize everything you have felt across these last however many minutes, because they have felt it too, are feeling it right now. You are alone together, which is, when you actually examine it, not alone at all. Marcus Aurelius understood this in a way that still stops me when I read it. He wrote, "We are all working together to one end, some with knowledge and purpose, and others without. Even in isolation, even in the silence of your particular season, even in the moments that feel most disconnected from any sense of shared human experience. You are part of something. The solitude does not extract you from the human story. It is part of the human story, one of its most universal chapters. The Stoics did not promise that the loneliness would disappear. They were too honest for that. What they promised, and what 2,000 years of people finding their way through this philosophy has repeatedly confirmed, is that the relationship with the loneliness can change. That you can move from being inside it, defined by it, suffocated by it, to being someone who has been through it and carries the specific depth that only people who have been through it possess. That depth is not nothing. It is in fact considerable. The people who have never sat in the difficult silence do not know what is in there. They have never had to develop the interior life that the silence demands. They have never been pushed far enough inward to discover the version of themselves that exists independently of every external validation. They have never had to build the self-knowledge that comes specifically and only from the seasons when the noise stops and the real questions become unavoidable. You have been building that, involuntarily, painfully, in ways that did not feel like building at all, but building nonetheless. Seneca wrote to Lucilius in one of his final letters, "It is not that I am brave, it is that I know what is worth fearing, and loneliness is not on that list." Because Seneca had done the work, had sat in the quiet long enough to discover that the self waiting inside it was not something to fear, but something to know. And knowing it changed everything about how the world outside it could affect him. That is where you are going. Not there yet, going, and going matters more than arrived, because arrived is static, going is alive. Going means you are in motion, means the season is not permanent, means the ground beneath you is changing even in the moments when you cannot feel it changing. Means that the version of you sitting in this moment, carrying what you have been carrying, is not the final version, is not the definition, is simply the current one, with more chapters ahead than behind. Here is what I need you to take from this, not as a concept, as a practice. The next time the loneliness rises, and it will rise, because this is a process, not a single moment of transformation, do not run from it. Do not immediately reach for the distraction. Do not let the mind convert the feeling into the conclusion. Sit in it long enough to remember what you now know, that it is a feeling, that feelings are temporary by nature, that underneath this particular feeling is a person of more depth and more substance and more genuine worth than the loneliness has ever been willing to admit. Name what you are feeling. Place it accurately in the present. Refuse to let it travel into permanent identity. Find the quiet beneath the panic. Remember that across this world, in this exact moment, someone else is sitting in the same quiet, carrying the same weight, moving through the same season. You are not lost. You are between chapters, and between chapters is not the end of the story. It is the breath before the next sentence, the pause that makes what comes after it land harder, the necessary stillness before the movement that changes everything. The movement is coming. You were never as alone as it felt. You were never as lost as the silence suggested. You were never as far from connection as the distance seemed. You were always simply on your way, and you still are. Keep going. If something in these 9 truths reached a part of you that needed reaching, share this with someone who is sitting in their own silence tonight. Not because they asked for help, because you remember what it felt like to be in it, and you know that sometimes the most powerful thing another person can offer is simply the proof that someone else has been there too. Subscribe to Stoic Origin, not for the numbers, because the next video is already being built for the version of you that is further along the path than you are today, and that version deserves to find it.